Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I think by my watch we have 1 minute to go, but I think since we're all ready, David and I are both ready, I think we'll just kick off now. Can I just check, David, that you can definitely hear me?
I can, yeah. Can you hear me?
Fabulous, thank you. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. It is as you know by the title, a passwordless future. It's presented by David Orrell, who is our applications architect at OpenAthens. My name is Sophie. I'm one of the marketing officers at OpenAthens, and I will be moderating this webinar for you today. So if you have any problems or questions, I'm the person who will be able to help you with those. So before we get started on the housekeeping, I just wanted to say that thank you so much for joining in this very weird time that we're all going through. Don't want to talk too much on it, but just want to pass on from myself and everyone from the OpenAthens family, some good wishes, and we all hope that your family and yourselves and your loved ones are all safe and happy during this very unprecedented time that we find ourselves in. But hopefully this webinar will be a nice welcome break for everyone, and a nice break from our usual 9-5 that we're finding ourselves in our new way of working. So if you go on to the next slide, please, David. You guys all know the drill by now, as I'm sure many of you have been to one of our webinars before, but just so you know, we are recording. So just in case anything gets missed, we will be uploading this recording to YouTube. There will be sometime this week, most likely Wednesday or Thursday. And you are muted, so don't worry about noise in the background. Don't worry about if you have children running around. We can't hear you at all, so don't worry about that. And if you do have any problems, please use the chat box that you'll see in the main Zoom toolbar. And if you have any questions for David, please try and use the Q&A box, and we'll try and keep those two separate because it makes it a bit easier for me to keep an eye on. And we do really encourage you to think of some good questions, and we'll be having some time at the end for David to answer all of those questions for you. And yeah, hopefully we can share some really good ideas based off of the presentation. So that's everything from me. I'm going to turn my video off and hand back over to David, who will get started with his presentation. So yeah, thank you, David.
Great, thanks, Sophie. So everyone can hear okay. So I'm really here to discuss what the future of authentication or use of passwords might be within the internet. So just as a little bit of background on me, so yeah, I'm David Orrell. I'm the application architect for OpenAthens. I've worked with a team for quite a long time now. I won't say exactly how long, but yeah, quite a few years. So I know the space we operate in pretty well, and particularly the sort of the federated identity space, which obviously is pretty key to what we do within OpenAthens. So really, this presentation is framed around the fairly basic questions like, are passwords still appropriate as a means for authentication in 2020? I'm sure there's not really anyone on this call who's unaware of the issues that passwords present and cause. But so we're just going to sort of explain some of the explore some of the issues with passwords, and maybe what some of the future developments are going forward. So quite a nice quote to start with here. So through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember but easy for computers to guess. So people know passwords should be strong, which obviously makes them hard to remember. People write them down, but they're remarkably easy to exploit, and we see passwords exploited on a daily basis. So just looking back, we kind of think about we've been using passwords maybe for 20 odd years, but actually the first use of passwords in computing sort of goes back to the 1960s. So there was a lot of work going on in the times of the early operating systems, and some work going on at MIT in the early 60s. put together a system called a compatible time sharing system. And this was really one of the first computer systems that was designed to handle or to serve multiple users. So obviously that needed a means for users to identify themselves to the system and gain access or gain a slice of time for use on the system. And in many ways, this whole system was groundbreaking in many ways. So it's not fair to criticize it for being the cause of some of the problems that we now see with passwords. Because it's a quite interesting anecdote was that it only took a year until some PhD students who were using the system were able to start exploiting passwords, using passwords to be able to gain additional time on the system because the time was very, very heavily quoted. So it didn't take long for some of the issues with passwords to become a reality. So sort of moving forwards to today, we use passwords every day. And anyone who's using the internet in one form or another will have, as we know, many passwords. And these create a lot of conflicting needs, as we know. So we know passwords should be strong. So we have systems that either enforce strong passwords through rules that users have got to put a certain number of characters and numbers within their passwords. And then you might see these gauges on some sites that tells you whether you've got a good, bad, or sort of mediocre password. And obviously from an end user perspective, yeah, strong passwords might be great, but how are you going to remember it? And then if we're also told, yeah, you should be using different passwords for different sites, obviously, as we know, that leads to the post-it note scenario where users are having to write down their passwords, yet they're told not to. So a lot of businesses might force users to change their password every month or so. That's not uncommon. And then obviously we've got stuff that end users don't see. So like how securely are the sites that we're registering with storing my passwords? Are they hashing them strongly? We have no idea. If you're registering for a site, you've no idea how protected the data that you're submitting is. We're reliant on, when we log in, that the username and password is sent securely to the website. Again, the average user doesn't understand the implications of that, and the implications of obviously reusing passwords and their password getting exploited and leaked through a hacking attempt on a site. So it's a complex space, and it's fair to say passwords have, the security environment has had to keep pace with increasing hacking attempts, and the end user doesn't have a good experience. I don't think there'll be much sort of disagreement with that statement. So if you just need to then start looking at the numbers on this. So some research from Oxford University a couple of years ago saying that the average presumably active internet user would have the order of 90 passwords. So when I heard that, I thought that's kind of absurd. So I use LastPass to manage my passwords, and I looked, and I've got more than 150 passwords. So it sounds a big number, but when it comes down to it, that would not be unusual for anyone who's actively using the internet, as most people in the developed world at least are. And then we see further research saying that the vast majority, so 80% plus of breaches are due to either using weak passwords or passwords that have been stolen and maybe reused. So it's down to the password itself is the vast sort of main reason behind account breaches. And if you just look at the numbers of the breaches, I mean, this is a few years ago now, but sort of out of the known data breaches, so we're talking in terms of billions of credentials are leaked, and these are the breaches that are reported and are known about. So if you've used sites like Have I Been Pwned, for instance, where you can check whether your credentials have been subject to a account breach, I can pretty confidently say that everyone on this webinar will have had credentials stolen in an account breach. It's not an unusual thing at all. But obviously the average sort of internet user is unaware of this, and unaware that if they have been reusing the accounts, that has opened up the possibility for their accounts in other sites to be breached. So yes, as I've already said, reuse of passwords is the norm. It's human behavior. We can't possibly use best practice with different passwords for different sites without having to use either tools to help us manage that, or post-it notes on the edge of our monitor saying what passwords we've used. And some of the attempts, like enforcing strength of passwords and forcing people to reset passwords, in many ways just makes the problem even worse. So clearly is a big problem, and this all ultimately comes down to it costs businesses a lot of money and time in terms of help desk queries, requesting resets to passwords, or the cost of what a data breach can cost to a business. Can be financially sort of very significant. So obviously as time went on, and as we started to do things like banking online, we needed a way to improve the strength of authentication. So this concept of adding a second factor, another layer of authentication on top of passwords to make things stronger. But ultimately, what all of these mechanisms are, they're other passwords. So it's adding more passwords to the problem. And I'm absolutely not saying that these don't make things more secure. They do. It's absolutely right that a bank should be using a second factor, but it's not a universal problem. So whether it's a little device issued by my bank, whether it's a website texting me an SMS, a code via SMS every time I log in, or whether it's one of the time-based token apps that you can see on the left-hand side there. They're all forms of second factor. This isn't new. This has been around sort of 20+ years, but it's not a universal solution. So we know, I mean, I imagine most people will use one or more of all of those methods, and it's a pain. It's a pain when I want to transfer money that I've got to go and find my my banking device so I can generate the code. It's not a user experience I want to be doing multiple times a day. Clearly, sending devices out might be fine if you're a bank, but it's not a universal solution that every website can issue users with physical devices to authenticate them. Nor are some of the other apps that you can use particularly easy to use for the average user. And as I said, these are still just other passwords. So it doesn't, passwords can be phished, and that does include second factor passwords because they are just passwords. So, it doesn't fundamentally prevent phishing attacks on these credentials. But as I said, second factor is in many ways much more secure than non-second factor, but it again adds its own set of problems. So just sort of standing back and sort of looking at the space. So if we are genuinely to solve some of the issues with passwords going forward, what are some of the qualities? What would some of the qualities need to be in order to be able to address this problem? So firstly, addressing the end user issue and user behavior, that if users are to use this, it's fundamentally got to be easier for users and passwords. It's got to be more convenient. So passwords themselves, yeah, they're a pain, but most people kind of understand them and they're kind of used to them. If we're going to replace them with something else, then we need to find something that's better and easier to use. They need to once and for all be resistant to phishing, and I mean by that I mean the system should be designed so that credentials cannot be phished, and that really means taking the user out of the step where a user can be tricked into providing their password to a rogue site via a phishing attack. If you can engineer a system where that isn't possible, because that's happening automatically in the background, then you've built something that's far, far better. For this to really be work everywhere, passwords work everywhere. So we need something that isn't locked into a particular website, a particular vendor or platform or device. So we don't want something that only works on an iPhone or an Android phone. This has got to work everywhere, and it's got to be easy to implement. I mean, you can add username and password to a website pretty straightforwardly. So for a solution to be universally deployed as an alternative, then it's got to be easy for developers to add to their websites. So quite a lot to ask for there. So if you cast your minds back to well, last year, sort of when the news had things other than the current pandemic situation, there was a bit of a flurry of news around about a year ago, where a lot of claims were made about the end of passwords. Passwords are going away. A huge breakthrough's been made in terms of the end of passwords. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what some of the work was that sort of lay behind these, that is potentially pointing towards a better way forward. So so really that last year formed the conclusion of work that had been ongoing for several years around two sort of key standards. So WebAuthn, which is a web API that allows developers to easily add strong authentication to their websites, and FIDO, which sort of is abbreviated, well, it means fast identity online. So the key phrase there is fast, that this is an easy sort of universal means to strongly authenticate users. So a lot of the work behind FIDO, I think, originally came out of Google and a few other sort of major players, and it's taken several years to sort of deploy and standardize. And then the W3C, who people might be aware are behind a lot of the core standards of the web, like HTML and HTTP. They completed the work on the WebAuthn standard, say around about a year ago. So that's all very promising. And if you look at who's participating in the FIDO Alliance, then it's pretty much all of the major players who have needs, who either issue identities, authenticate users, or have needs in the space. So quite a sort of comprehensive, broad alliance to try and address this problem. So looking at how these standards are supported, so really it's a pretty good story now. So all of the major browsers now support this. When I first did this presentation, the only omission on this was Safari, but as of sort of late last year, that both Safari on Macs and iOS do now support the WebAuthn and FIDO standards. And it's part of Android and of Windows as well. So if you use sort of the Windows Hello facial recognition authentication when you open your laptop, does support these standards. So in terms of the technology, then this is really now complete. The support is out there in the world. But obviously that leads the actual means of authentication. So we've got these standards that are now able to securely authenticate people. How does that authentication happen? So the standards are really split into two types of authenticators. So you've got platform authenticators. So these are really cases where the device that you're using has some strong, and that usually means biometric authentication built in. So it might be you've got a fingerprint sensor, as most modern phones already do. And obviously increasingly those are available on laptops as well. But as I said, obviously it could be things like, it could be Face ID or Windows Hello as well, so for facial recognition. And this isn't tied to any one particular sort of means of authentication. And then you get what they call roaming or external authenticators. So these are little devices that have been around for a while. So you might be familiar with YubiKeys, which are these little USB sticks that can generate secure authentication tokens. So it's like automatically typing in that 6-digit code for you when you press the button. You physically plug these into your device. So those might be suitable in cases where you don't have strong authentication built into your devices. So that's all really promising. Obviously, there's a certain amount somewhere about how quickly that support can be rolled out to on an internet scale. So we're talking billions of users potentially here. So this isn't going to be a quick transition. But we'll come on to that a little bit later. So let's just talk a little bit about how this looks from an end user perspective and what the flow is. So the standards really split down into two phases. So one is about a registration. So this is when you first use a website. So where you would normally be filling in a registration form and then creating your username and password. So really the first stage is the same. You would register for a site as you normally would, but then really at the stage then that you would normally be providing a password to that website, that your device will then challenge you and say, please authenticate yourself via, say, fingerprint. And if people on the call are familiar with what we call public key cryptography, so this is where you have automatically generates a key, and there's a secure part of that stays on your device, and then there's a public part of that, the public key, which you can then pass to someone else. It's public, there's nothing secret about it. So this is exactly how this authentication works. So a pair of keys is generated for this website. The private bit stays on your device, and then the public key is then sent to the website, and that gets registered in the site as a password normally would be. So it's stored presumably in a database behind that website. But obviously the key, or two key aspects here. So firstly, your device is automatically generating this. So think of that key as basically the strongest possible password you could be generating. That's done on behalf of the user. They don't need to think up a password, it's done for them. And secondly, because it's a public key, even if that database behind that website got hacked, that data is useless to the hacker because they're public keys. They can be public, as the name suggests. So you've got by design a much secure and easier to use system from the end user's perspective. So how the login process works, so again, quite similar. So at the point I return to the site, I log in, again, my device prompts me to authenticate. Public key is then sent to the website. Challenge happens behind the scenes, and then by the Web Authn standard, that site can then verify that this is the returning user by using the key, the public key that they've got stored within their database. So taking the technical steps out, so as an end user, this is roughly how the flow would work. So I would enter my username. My device would then prompt me. So the left-hand side would be on, say, a laptop. So this would say on my Mac, I've got a built-in fingerprint sensor. I can choose to use that. I'll authenticate. Or on the right-hand side on the phone, I touch the fingerprint sensor on my phone and I'm signed in. So not only is that much more secure, it's also much sort of, it flows better. It's much easier from an end user's perspective. So a lot of those goals and those that I talked about a few slides back are very much ticked by this set of standards. Okay, so there's actually two what they call experiences associated with these standards. So what I've really shown there is what's called the passwordless experience. So this is a flow that is designed to completely replace passwords. So this would be where I would today go to a website, register an account, provide a username and password, and sign in. So that's the passwordless experience. The other experience is used in cases where you're currently using a security key or, say, the banking hardware token device, because fundamentally this is more secure because it's not phishable. As I said, some of these existing second factor devices are still phishable. So this can be used to replace both simple username and passwords, but also existing strong authentication with Secondfactor. So just to say a little bit about the scope of what we've talked about here. So at this point, we're only talking about authentication, and the scope of these standards is deliberately narrow. So by authentication, I mean the direct replacement for the username and password. And obviously, a username and password alone doesn't tell me what my name or email address is or any other attributes about me. So this doesn't replace standards like, obviously, in the OpenAthens space, federation, and how we can exchange attributes about a user between websites. It very much complements that, and it replaces the password piece with a stronger alternative. So what's kind of sometimes called modern authentication. So there's really two sides to that. One is a stronger form of authentication, which we've talked about, and the other is risk-based authentication. So this is being able to prompt the user with a suitably strong challenge at time we need it. So for instance, if I'm just logging into a website, and I do that several times a day from the same device, the same network, the website can make pretty good deduction that that's me returning. Whereas if I log in, say, from a new device or a new location, or I try to do something within the website, like say in banking site, like transferring money to someone, you might then want to up the strength of authentication as and when it's needed. So this kind of more sort of adaptive authentication is quite often called sort of risk-based. So much more appropriate authentication that's both less intrusive for the user, but also provides a stronger level of security. So just looking at what some of the impacts are, I mean, this example isn't directly related to WebAuthn, but it certainly shows in a big enterprise, in this case Google. You might have seen a couple of years ago, they announced that since rolling out YubiKeys, so YubiKey is a strong form of authentication across all of their employees, that Google had seen 0 successful attempts to phish credentials off their employees. So didn't reduce the level. It basically prevented successful phishing attempts. So that's sort of how effective strong authentication can be when it's deployed at scale. And then in January this year, the World Economic Forum published quite a good paper which sort of set out the need for businesses around addressing the password problem. So both the economic impacts, so the cost to businesses of not addressing the password problem, but also addressing the need that end users need something more, something better, because identity theft is such an issue. So that came out in January. Obviously, an awful lot's happened in the world, both economically and socially, since that paper came out. But nevertheless, it's very good, good read if you're sort of interested in finding out a good sort of perspective on what I've talked about. So just really got 3 points just to sort of summarise what I've talked about. So firstly, hopefully I've sort of convinced you that the problems that passwords cause are huge and really are now getting too costly to ignore, which is really what that World Economic Forum papers ultimately saying, that something has to be done because it's the problems of identity theft and the cost to businesses of credentials and identities being leaked is getting too big a problem. Something has to be done. Hopefully I convinced you that through new standards, we've now got quite a good technical solution to address this, which is balancing both a better user experience, but also a secure form of authentication. But I think that sort of my word line a bit of caution to finish on, and that this obviously isn't going to be a drop-in solution. There's a lot of sort of entrenched behaviour of users to get over. People are familiar with passwords. Because this uses biometrics, one of the things I didn't highlight, and I should have done, was when you are providing that key to the website using your fingerprint, you're not sending your biometric data to that website. All you're doing, that stays on the device. All you're doing is generating a key that's passed to the website. But again, that might not be that apparent to every user. Am I giving my fingerprint, or is this image of my face being sent to this website? That potentially is quite a big barrier to get over with users. And secondly, it's going to, if this happens at all, take quite a while to get adopted outside the sort of enterprise context. So the Google example illustrates that yes, businesses can enforce this and say their users must use this level of authentication, and that's all very well. But if this is to be a solution that's going to improve security for billions of users, then that's going to will require quite a shift to take place. Right, so that's really all I had to say. So hopefully that sort of provokes a few questions.
Hi, thank you, David. Yeah, we haven't had any questions in yet, but I'll give everyone another couple of minutes. And as I said, that one just came in. So this is from Brittany. Are there contingencies for people who don't have access to biometric devices? And does that mean vulnerable users could become even more vulnerable? Great question.
Yeah, so as I said, there's ways to add stronger authentication to existing devices. So you can provide plug-in devices like EV keys or a little USB stick that would allow fingerprint authentication. So yes, there are solutions. Whether those are practical at scale, I'm not convinced about. So which is why I think for this, start relying on means of authentication that are already built into devices and smartphones. then I think that's going to be the shift if that happens. In terms of the vulnerable users, obviously that probably needs unpacking in terms of types of vulnerable users. Obviously, fingerprint might not be suitable for all types of users, say with disabilities, but it's worth saying that the standards I've talked about aren't locked to any particular types of authentication. So you've got facial recognition, you've got fingerprints, but there's nothing that's saying that those are the only means of authentication that could be used. And more forms will obviously, as things evolve and technology moves on, then other forms of authentication will be available as well. So hopefully that's addressed some of those questions.
Great, and we've got lots of questions coming in now. So I think that's now after we're asking the first one, we've got lots coming in. So firstly, this is from Herbert. He said, "Can you explain again, excuse me, how the public keys work and why it would be useless to a hacker?"
Okay, yeah, good question. So the way a public and private keys work is that at the point you register, your device will generate these two bits of information. So one's private and one's public. The private key stays on your device. The public part can be sent to, in this case, the website. You could post it on Twitter. From a security perspective, it's public. It can be read by anyone. Because you cannot use it without that private part of it that's stored on your device. So this is very widely used. So whenever we access like a secure website, that's all based on this type of cryptography. So this has been around for decades. The other key aspects that I probably didn't highlight when I talked through the flow was why this is resistant to phishing. Because obviously with phishing, that's when you're tricking the user into supplying the key or password to a malicious third party. But because the public key is only exchanged after the user authenticates, the device is controlling. So the device knows from, say, the URL that you are actually at your bank and not a malicious third party. So it knows that the site that you originally registered at is now the site that's asking for that credential. So the time at which that credential is exchanged is now being controlled by your device and not left to the user to sort of wrongly provide that data to a third party. Plus, the user never actually sees those keys. That's all happens in the background. So even if the user was tricked into please send us your private key, they wouldn't have access to it because that's all stored on the device. So it's kind of the security baked into the system.
Great, thank you. So the next one is how might users get over trust when using fingerprints and images? Surely these can also be stolen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on that towards the end, in that there's obviously, well, firstly I'd say fingerprints, users use fingerprints all the time now. So I think quite a lot of maybe distrust that would have happened, say 10 years ago, might have diminished somewhat around using their fingerprints. But as I said, I think a potential barrier for this is that if a user goes to a website and that website is ultimately asking them to provide their fingerprint in order to register, that the user could think that their fingerprint is being sent to their website. Completely understandable. And I think that is a shift that would need to be overcome. And I think in many ways it might be even more of an issue with facial recognition, in that that this site isn't your image isn't being sent to that website. So really that comes down to the user interface of the devices that are doing that, to make sure that it's communicated to users that those things aren't happening, and that your fingerprint will not be stored anywhere outside your device, or your photo isn't going to be sent. So hopefully those barriers can be overcome, but I think time will tell.
Yeah, great. And we've had two questions both asking similar things on how passwordless sign-in can be used for applications like OpenAthens and other identity provider software, and if there's a future for that.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope there's a future for that. Again, I kind of touched on that a little bit when I talked about federation and the difference between passwordless and federation. So obviously OpenAthens uses username and passwords, but it's also about exchange of attributes. So ultimately, when you're signing into a website with OpenAthens, is that you're confirming to that website usually that you're affiliated to a given organization, so that you can be mapped to a license. So clearly passwordless authentication alone cannot do that. It can provide a more secure means to authenticate the user, or more secure and convenient means to authenticate the user, but it's not designed to tell a website or a publisher anything more detailed about the user in the form of attributes. So in that sense, it very, very much complements OpenAthens and other federated technologies, so OpenID and so on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, was there another part to the question, or did I cover that?
Well, yeah, it was just, so one of them was saying, one of them said, yeah, can you see passwordless sign-in support coming to providers like OpenAthens and Shibboleth? And the other one was saying, what are your thoughts on how an SSO solution like OpenAthens would work in a passwordless future? So I think, yeah, if there's anything else you'd like to add, but those were the two questions I summarized.
Yeah, so I think I addressed the second one. Yeah, so I think it's very much on our roadmap to be adding support for passwordless authentication, both natively in OpenAthens, but also a lot of people use OpenAthens through technologies like ADFS or other sort of SSO solutions, some of which already support some of these standards. So if you're using, say, ADFS or Okta or one of these other standards, that already is supported WebAuthn. So you could say, in those senses, you could already use this with OpenAthens. But we're certainly looking at adding it to our roadmap to add native support for access, say, both for end users and for administrators.
Mm-hmm. So we've got two more questions. The first is, does the public/private key arrangement mean that you are restricted to accessing a site or account from the device you use to initially register, or is it transferable between devices? If you'd like me to repeat that, I will.
I think I got it. So is the username and passwords locked to your device, or if I try and access, say, a website from my phone and then go to my laptop, can it be transferred across?
Yeah.
Good question. And I think it really comes down to how it's implemented in your operating system. So really, this is quite a low level. The authentication's managed by your operating system. So I don't actually know for certain, but I would certainly expect that those operating system vendors would be able to make those credentials either portable between devices, or you could have different keys on different devices that are registered sort of more than one time with the website. Either way would work, because obviously the user doesn't see the key. So if you've got a key for your laptop and then a different key for your phone, the experience is the same for the user. But so I think it could be addressed either way. Either the operating system can share that data between devices, or you can register multiple times.
Okay, great, thank you. And the final question that we've had through says, the site you're logging into may not be collecting your biometric data, but what about the device company? Is there a user agreement when you buy one of these fingerprint keys?
So, I mean, obviously, if you're using, say, a laptop that's got fingerprint, or you're using that within your phone, then you would get a choice at the time you set up your device as to whether you want to register a fingerprint. But as I said, your fingerprint is in all cases stored within the device. So obviously there's an element of trust with the vendor of your who's produced your device that is happening. But that's usually a step that a user already gone through. So it's already using the fingerprint that's tied to your device. So I'd say that step's already occurred before you even start using the system.
Okay, fabulous. So that is all the questions that we've had through. David, do you have anything else to add, or if there's anything else you'd like to say before we finish?
No, I think that's it. So yeah,
great.
Thank everyone for joining.
Awesome, great. Yeah, so thank you all. This will be this whole session has been recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube, as I said, and this will be sent out to you as well, along with all of our future webinars in the next couple of months. All that information is available on our website, but I'll make sure that's sent out to you as well as a follow-up email. So thank you so much for listening, and apologies, I was getting a few messages about sound at the beginning, but it seemed to have kind of settled out. So thank you for persevering if you were experiencing any issues, but that is just unfortunately the risk of us presenting from home. So but yeah, thank you for your patience, and yeah, apologies if you're having any problems. And thank you for all the thank yous coming through. It's very kind of you. Someone said thank you, very interesting, David. So that's from Rosin. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Rosin. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, David. And yeah, we'll keep in touch. Everyone, I hope you stay safe and happy. And yeah, we hope to see you guys again at another one of our webinars in the future. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.